members of. Initially, I thought that was a great idea. One of the county commissioners has maybe almost talked me out of that. So I think that's something we need to explore a little bit farther.
Right. And does anyone, Ms. Broyles, I realize you didn't get a chance to answer that follow-up question, so I'll give you 30 seconds about having a voting member on all of those boards.
I'm not real sure that it's feasible to be able to have a voting member. I just think that we need to be very careful. The city needs to be very careful in these endeavors and making sure that we're not being arbitrary in the selection of who has a voting member and who does not.
Great.
I want to follow up with 30 seconds on that, and that is, again, the difference with the Cheyenne Animal Shelter is it's not a board that we've created or a part of or a member of. It is somebody we have a contract with. And to ask for a voting member on an independent body is, well, where does that stop? Well, we have contracts with other organizations out there too. So I think that's something we need to look at somewhat carefully.
Great. Great. The next question is, what do you think of the mayor's Fight the Blight effort so far? How would you improve or change it going forward? And Mr. Escobar, I believe it is yours to start.
Well, growing up on the west side, it's always been more of the blighted area of Cheyenne, but it's also one of the areas that when people travel into this city that they first see. So I think I would support the continued effort of what the mayor is trying to accomplish there. You do want to make sure that you have or project a good image to anybody that's traveling through, especially with wanting to capture tourism dollars, which is one of the things that I think if I'm on the council I'm going to try and pursue more of, and broaden our tax base. You got to have a good image.
Right. And Mr. Roybal.
Excuse me. She's actually doing something. She's actually knocked down a building. She's talked to another building owner that said, okay, we'll tear this thing down. That's the Atlas Motel. Met with a gentleman that was looking at the hitching post. She called her. She got out of her office, came down and met with him also, just to make sure that he knew that we were interested in gaining his business and helping knock the hitch down. So I can't be an armchair quarterback on this because I'm not 100% helping. I vote, I do a few things with it, but I'm not out there in the trenches every day. So I'm thinking so far she's doing a good job because she's actually doing something. Thank you.
Great. And I realize I've been calling you Mr. Rennie. You are a doctor. Sorry, Dr. Rennie. What are your thoughts?
Well, we're making progress, and the progress has been slow. And the answer is really simple: fund it better. I mean, really, it's one of those things. If we want to fight blight more, we need to allow a lot more monies towards it. And I think there's some sentiment on the current council to do that. But if you take now that the city is now doing something we're building municipal court where the Kerry building used to be. But that's a perfect example. We looked at that. And what it would cost to tear that building down. We got estimates upwards north of $800,000 to abate that building and bring it back to a buildable lot. But the value of it was only $400,000. So that meant we were going to take at least $250,000 to $400,000 loss if we abated that building. And in the past, there hasn't been the political will to do that. And I guess that's something that I would like to hear, from the voters. There are issues and projects that probably are not going to go away and not going to get better unless the city gets involved. But it also means the city's probably going to take a loss on them to get something built there and moving forward and getting something viable there. Personally, I think it's worth the risk, but I guess I'd like to hear from my constituents what they think on that.
Right. And Ms. Broyles.
I think this is an important topic that I do definitely support it. I'm thinking back a few years to sponsoring ordinances and things so that with people who are neglectful with their properties and things like that, if the city has to come in and to abate that situation, that would be added to their their water bills and finding a mechanism in order to do that. I remember supporting that on council before. Also, Councilman Jimmy Valdez and I started the graffiti task force several years ago because that's part of blight, and that's an aspect of our community that people were not wanting to see, and they wanted to see it addressed. And that started off with volunteers, youth alternatives, and eventually it evolved to the point where the police department took that over, and they continue to remove graffiti and get it off. So that started as a community project and then advanced, and I'm very pleased to see it's continuing even today, that there's still an interest in getting that taken care of. I would have loved to have been on that task force when Mayor Orr started it. I think it's a great initiative, and I do support it. I think there are some other ways that my experience in social services that I can bring to that, and dealing with the people who are going to be displaced first and figuring out those issues. That's where my experience and expertise would come in, and then still moving forward and doing what needs to be done to make our community safe and a beautiful place to be and to live.
Great. Oh, wait. You went first, so 30 seconds follow-up if you would like. Sorry.
The other thing that I probably would follow up on would be through the treasurer's office, that are we pursuing all the federal grants that are out there, whether it's historic preservation or whether or not there's grants for low-income housing, and is the city taking advantage of all the federal opportunities that are out there as well as state opportunities?
Right. And Mr. Roybal.
Well, just to follow up on Dr. Rennie's discussion about the sentiment of the council on funding or losing money on projects, we've got the Heinz and the Whole wheel in both halves of the hole, so we have the whole hole and the Heinz building that the city has pledged. The city council has pledged $750,000 to help build it out. So there's several caveats on that as to when somebody gets the money. But the council whole, it was a 9-0, if I remember right, that we said, yes, we will help if you can fix that blight.
Right. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, it's still, I want to echo, when I'm a former member of the DDA board, and there were discussions in the DDA about how do we do something with some of the vacant buildings downtown, and I called like cities around the region, and they all had the same problems, and it all came down to, we can abate a problem, but we're not going to recover the cost of abatement, and our governing body isn't willing to supplement that to this point. So it really does come down to funding, and we have to have the political will to fund it.
Great.
I would agree.
Oh, sorry.
I would agree with Dr. Rennie in that we do have to have the funding in order to go forward, because people need a process to have a hearing, and it's going to take more in your legal department as well as, in not construction, but the other departments that would address this issue. You're going to need to fund it in order to make it work.
Great. All right. Another effort. What do you think of the city's efforts to revive the West Edge? Do you see any way to improve or change that effort going forward? And we're back to Mr. Roybal.
The biggest thing the city did in the last 30 years, or almost 40 years now, was I think it was 1980. Everything from Snyder West, they zoned light industrial. So thinking that's where the industrial portion of the city would be, well, that didn't happen. So we kind of just sat and kind of got a little more disrepair. Nobody looked at it. But now in the last 2-3 years, we've got walking paths through there. We've got the Reed Avenue project. We've got right across the street. Pete Councilman Laybourne was saving, what's the tree's name? Cowboy or Cottonwood Joe?
I don't remember.
Yeah, saving Cottonwood Joe in the newspaper. So there's a movement afoot to bring the west side back into the city. We see money going towards there. We're seeing investment in there now that we as a council told them that we would put across the street.
Civic Center Commons.
Civic Center Commons, sorry. And we fought through it. There was probably 5 or 6 headlines. It started with "We lied" and "This is wrong" and "This is wrong." We kept the political will to make it happen, And with that, we've gotten a lot of investment in properties, people buying things over there to see that we're going that way. Thank you.
Great. Dr. Rainey?
That is an area that we have seen as having a huge potential, and that's the reason why, as Mr. Roybal referred to, I mean, we came to an impasse with Civic Center Commons with the current mayor at one point, early on in her administration, and with our city engineer at the time, and we pretty much forced the issue because we wanted to see that development built. In addition, we've also included $4 million on the 6 penny for the Reed Avenue corridor, which is actually, believe it or not, I mean, where the rail line runs, there's actually a city street there. Reed Avenue is still a designated city street. And we want to redo that area and make that more of a pedestrian-friendly area. It's already paying off, and the Warehouse 21 has expanded because of our efforts to initiate something there. West Edge Collective is building on the south end of the area, and the Deneen's have just recently gotten approval to start building a townhomes at the site of the old Cupid's bookstore. So we had been told that if the city would sink some money into there and put some money where our mouth is, that we would start to see private development follow, and we are seeing that now.
Right. Ms. Broyles?
I'm excited about the West Edge and all the things that are already happening there, as well as the potential for the future, particularly in bringing young entrepreneurs to our community. Several young people work down there in their offices, and it's like walking into an office, maybe in Fort Collins or some other place. They seem to have some different needs, some different ways of thinking, very creative ways of thinking and moving things forward. And I think we really need to be paying attention to not only the millennial generation, but what's happening with technology of today, and making sure that we are encouraging people to stay in Cheyenne and when they graduate, but also bringing them back to Cheyenne as well. So I definitely support all the things that have happened with the West Edge project.
Great.
One more thing. Am I out of time? Did you start?
No.
I have a few seconds?
Sure.
Okay. The Brownsfield, when we talk about grants and things like that, I was there when Deneen's first put the shovel in the ground and built the building that they have now, through some of the grants that are offered to clean up contamination, things like that. And those are really important to continue to pursue those and utilize those funds that are available to us in revitalizing these areas in the West Edge of town.
Great.
Thanks.
Mr. Escobar?
I guess there's not a lot more for me to add, other than that I would continue to support that. If you look at what larger cities are doing, and what Denver did with Lodo, of course this is on a smaller scale, but still it goes back to projecting that image as well. And especially with City Hall being down here in that area, I think it leaves a black eye on the city if we're right here, and yet across the street we're letting things delipitate. And so I would always support something that's going to bring more entrepreneurs, keep our young people in this town. I've been one of the lucky ones where my daughters have managed to find good paying jobs after going and getting out of college, and they stayed in Cheyenne. Well, 2 out of 3. No, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, but I'll take that.
Great.
Isn't that a quote of Meatloaf?
Is that I probably did. That won't be the last time I do that.
Great. Anyone have anything to add on that topic? No? Okay. Do you support charging developers increased impact fees to cover additional public services such as police, fire, road maintenance, which their projects make necessary in regard to requiring more policing, more city services? And I guess we'll start with Dr. Rainey.
Get this one first, did I? We've looked at that in the past, and we haven't approved it. There may come a point where we have to do that. I think I think I read a study somewhere that, I mean, usually the argument is that increased growth will give increased either property tax and sales tax revenues to pay for improvements. That obviously has never happened in our general fund budget when we've had to go out and do improvements, whether it be fire stations or things like that. We've always had to do that through the sixth penny. So if we're content with using the current funding model we have, then no, we don't need to look at that. But if we have enough six penny issues or projects out there, then the only way we're going to fund some of these things like fire stations would be to look at some kind of impact fee.
So at this point, do you think they're necessary?
Not yet, but I don't think we should close the door.
Okay. Great. Ms. Broyles.
I think we need to consider impact fees as a possible funding source. If you look at areas such as, I believe, Swan Ranch, major industrial areas in town that do not have the fire protection that they really do need. If we have a major emergency out there and our firefighters are pulled from the stations closest near to them, it's quite a distance. That's going to leave a lot of unprotected areas within the city where that'll be left unattended should they be called there. When we look at the development, Saddle Ridge, for example, when I was on council, that's one of the very first developments that I could recall, which actually had the forethought of making sure we're providing land for parks, making sure there's a place for a school to be built, those things were already considered in the whole package when that process went forward. And I think we're looking at things now through those lenses from the city perspective. That is, I think, what makes it successful, because people want those amenities when they come to Cheyenne, when they build their homes. They pretty much expect them as a quality of life issue. So I think that we need to continue providing that. If not, we may look at a percentage of a sales tax percentage. Again, we might need to restructure the six penny and what that ballot looks like. If you have to take all these things into consideration at the same time and what is that vision? What do we want Cheyenne to look like as we move into the future? And then how are we going to address that? You hope you don't have to use impact fees, but I think that might be a possibility in the future.
Mr. Escobar.
I would be resisting impact fees at this point without researching alternative methods of funding. Short and sweet.
Short and sweet.
Short and sweet.
Losing his voice now. Mr. Roybal.
The Lummis family just added 2,200 acres to the south side of the city, out past the LCCC. And when they were setting up all the fees and everything they did a voluntary development fee. So which they set it in contracts with the city, so that now we know that they know what their development fees are going to be going into the future. So if we decide to, let's say, 5 years down the line, add development fees, they did a real smart thing in setting theirs today. The six penny is the model we use to build amenities. It has been for 20 years, 25 years, until somebody finds a better model. I think that's what will end up staying. And do I support them? Again, we look at stuff 5, 10, 15, 20 years in the future. If it's something that's going to be 5 or 10 years from now, probably.
Okay. But not right now?
Not right now.
Okay. Great. Anyone have a follow-up to that? No?
Come on, Ken, get some short and sweet in there.
Short and I'm sweet.
Great. So now we're going to move to questions from our audience. So if you do have any additional questions, please wave one of our lovely helpers down and they will grab it from you. The first one is, do you have any thoughts on Airbnbs in residential neighborhoods? There are neighborhoods that prohibit, are there any neighborhoods, Are there any regulations that prohibit Airbnbs in residential neighborhoods right now? And would you see that as something that might be possible